efforts to catch up with science and technology and innovation. Science and technology and innovation, these are indispensable in the modern economy, in the modern world.
The problem being that, while we have our PhDs here, there aren't enough of us. And everywhere else in the world, for research to be successful, you need a complete research group.
It's very important that the PAASE members and scientists based in the Philippines are continuously in contact, so we will know the needs of the Filipinos and opportunities that the Filipinos can have to do science with their PAASE counterparts.
I think that is one of the good programs that they keep on supporting some of the initiatives of our researchers and scientists here in the country.
The role of this cooperation among these government agencies really is to be able to attract science and technology global-based companies to set up shop here. And that is really key in terms of developing the science and technology innovation ecosystem in the country.
We really need to ratchet up the appreciation, the recognition of the importance of science and technology and innovation.
And we are all trying to attain what we call the common good, the greater, higher, long-term good of the Filipino people.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this morning's webinar. So for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we're the Philippine American Academy of Scientists and Engineers. So it is an organization made up of scientists and researchers of Filipino descent, initially based in the Philippines and in the US, but now we're moving towards other regions of the world. So we now have members in other countries. So with us today is our speaker, who will tell us more about the challenges and new strategies to manage invasive apple snails and rice agriculture, the lessons from the ASEAN countries. So let me introduce our speaker for this morning. He brings with him over 25 years of work experience in sustainable agriculture and development across Asia, Cambodia, India, Japan, Philippines, and Vietnam. Also from Africa, Pacific Islands, and the Caribbean, serving in NARS, regional and international organizations. He is a senior advisor to the Ministries of Agriculture in both Fiji and Solomon Islands and has assisted in the development of national agriculture sector policy, international cooperation, national research, and advised the senior directors to translate sector policy into corporate plans. To revive the scientific productivity in Fiji, he activated the Fiji Agricultural Journal and Fiji Institute of Agricultural Scientists that had previously been inactive for more than 15 years, while serving as visiting adjunct professor in several national and regional universities in Fiji. Likewise, he also did this in the Philippines while serving in state universities and colleges, mentoring students, researchers, farmers, and youth as part of his social responsibility. At present, he has edited 4 books and published over 150 research articles with students and collaborators on crop protection, particularly regarding invasive alien species in aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems and home gardening. He is an affiliated fellow of many professional societies and honorary member in a number of professional networks and associations. So without further ado, let's welcome our speaker for this morning, Dr. Ravindra Joshi.
Good morning, everyone, and warm greetings to you all. I think we have participants from other countries as well. I hope you are all doing very fine during this pandemic times. And thank you, Dr. Kathleen Aviso, for the kind introduction. It's a great honor to be introduced by the Asia's rising scientists. Congratulations on your excellence. I'm really pleased to be here in this PAASE Friday webinar. I'm also grateful to Professor Dr. Gisela Concepcion, the president of the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering, for this opportunity to share many years of continuing experience on managing the invasive apple snails in rice agriculture with the global partners or collaboration from the US, from the ASEAN member states, from Japan, from Europe, even from South America, where the snails have originated, and in the Caribbean. The first reported damage of the invasive apple snail, or many people in the Philippines knows it, if you say golden cohol, to rice is in the northern Philippines as early as 1987. And at that time, I was still a student at the University of Philippines, but at the same time working for the Philippine Rice Research Institute, at that time based in Los Baños. So, what I'm going to share is the work that has started since 1987, when the first invasion of snail, and I happen to be one of the few who have worked on the snail since the first invasion in the Philippines, and now I share these experiences in other countries. So please let me share my slide first. Give me a second. Is it visible?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. So what I'm going to talk about is our experiences since 1987. What are the new challenges and what will be the new strategies in changing climate regime to manage invasive species like the invasive apple snail in rice, and what lessons have we learned from the ASEAN countries? So currently I'm working as a senior consultant to the Philippine Rice Research Institute, and I'm also an associate for the Center for Agriculture and Biosciences International, which is our office is in Malaysia, but our main headquarters is in UK. So let me briefly tell you about our organization. I think that's important. Philippine Rice Research Institute is a government national institute. It's the National Institute for Rice Research. We have International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, but we also have a Philippine Rice Research Institute, just like other countries that have their own national rice program. So I work with the crop protection department. We develop sustainable pest management strategies that are ecologically, environmentally friendly, safe, economical, and sustainable. The most important is these technologies can easily be adopted by farmers in many of the third world countries. The Center for Agriculture and Biosciences International is an international organization, and they work on invasive species, not only on rice, but on other crops around the world. And I happen to work with this institute for quite a long time, since my graduate studies in India. So, Philippines is one of the CABI's member countries, and currently we are doing a lot of work with CABI in the Philippines with the Department of Agriculture, and I am the contact person of CABI in the Philippines, especially for invasive species program. So today's presentation is not only about my work, it's about the work of our partners, and we have been working for a long time. You can see we have worked all around the globe, wherever the invasive species, wherever this particular snail species have invaded. And there's a very good collaboration with the University of Hawaii and many US universities, as well as with the US private sector, where I'll be talking a little about how our work has translated to the benefit to the farmers in other countries. In the Philippines, when we started working in 1987, there were very few people who were very much interested because there was not much funding. So I decided while at field rice, I visualized that this would be a problem in rice because of its biological characteristics. So I was very persistent. I started with a very little funding, but eventually now there is so much interest around the world that anytime there's an invasion of this snail, I'm invited to advise the respective government. One of the recent invasions 3 months back, for the first time in African country, is in Kenya. And now we are working very closely with CABI as well as the national organization in those countries. So, very recent, for the past few years, I have been concentrating a lot in Spain, in Haiti, and also in Africa, aside from my passion to help the Filipino farmers in this country. The structure of my presentation, I'm going to make it very simple because we have a diverse audience here. Just give you what is the current status of apple snails, how do they impact rice production, not on human health as well as environment and ecosystems, what are the old methods and what are the new management options that are needed, and what are the new challenges in the changing climate regime, and also what kind of knowledge-based information we have developed, which is widely used around the world, and a little about the launch of our book that was launched in Singapore in the International Rice Conference, and then about what is the most important is for me to make this presentation is how can we expand partnerships or collaboration in terms of managing this world's invasive species. So, this snail is considered as, the old name used to be golden apple snail. And so it's a term, and in this, it is one of the 100 world's worst invasive alien species. And this has been mentioned in the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the Invasive Species Global Group. So in this group, only selected invasive species which are causing a lot of economic losses, as well as implications on health, or even in terms of biodiversity loss, and also disturbance in aquatic environments are listed in this list. So the global distribution of these snails, they are endemic to South America. That is their native home, and they have been introduced to many countries around the world. Basically, for first thing is for food, second is as in an aquarium trade, and third, usually some of the countries have released them to control weeds in shrimp farms and also in aquaculture. So the most of the, like in the Philippines, it was introduced from Taiwan, basically in the early 1980s during the government program, and it was introduced from Taiwan to increase the protein source of the Filipino farmers. However, when it was introduced, there was not much risk assessment, and also in terms of looking at the markets. They were basically introduced because they grow very fast, they're very high protein content, and so it would contribute to the nutrition of the poor Filipino farmers, as well as similar kind of reasons have been in other countries. Like after Philippines, other countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and all the ASEAN countries started introducing this. So this is called the deliberate introduction. It was for a purpose. It was basically for a good purpose. However, these snails become the first reported case in 1987 in Cagayan in northern Philippines was basically because these snails were abandoned by the people because they were not tasting very good. And as a result, because of the serious typhoons, most of the snails came out of the rearing ponds and spread to rice field. So that was the first time the snails have invaded rice in the Philippines. And today it is one of the most chronic pests. And that is why it is considered as an invasive species. So they have invaded so many countries in many countries now. And one of the most recent invasion is in Kenya, in Africa. And the threats of invasion are very serious in India, Bangladesh. And so I have been conducting a lot of webinars as well as knowledge sharing with these countries and providing them how they can prevent the invasion, especially for India. The risk of invasion is very high from Pakistan as well as from Myanmar and Thailand. So most of the time these invasions, once the snails have invaded and have colonized and have established, it is very difficult to control these snails because of their high reproductive capacity and adapt to the different environment. So first of all, our most earlier work, we used to identify snails based on the cell morphology. This is a traditional taxonomic tool, which was widely used since the early 1980s. And I just want to show a very simple thing: the diversity of the snails within the same species. So you have specimens here. If you look at A and B, these are specimens from Argentina, which is their native home. You can look at the size of the snails; they are huge, and also in terms of colorations and stripes. And when you look at the specimens from C, which is from Hawaii, where a lot of work is being done, and our major expert on taxonomy is Professor Robert Covey from University of Hawaii. He is the lead authority when it comes to identifying the snails in the world. He and his team, they have done extensive work, and I work very extensively with them because they are the leaders when it comes to taxonomy. And if you look at the snails of the Philippines, that is in letter D, you can see the coloration, even the size of the snail, even the size of the operculum is very variable. So there's a big diversity within the same species of snails. So that's why most of the time when the snails were identified in the past, before 2008, all snails were mostly identified as Pomacea caniculata. Now, if you look at the other thing that many researchers, including for me, it was not much looking at this aspect of excise, because I believe that the excise would vary depending on what kind of foods the snails have access to in the natural habitats. So, but there is a lot of work that has been done, and this to some extent gives a rough estimation of what kind of species, but it can also give a misleading species identification. So these are all photos that are taken from in Brazil, except the one for the P. caniculata, which is the most common snail. And you can see the coloration, the size of the individual egg clutch, the size of the individual eggs is very variable. And this is currently also used as one of the preliminary identification tool. So during 2008, this was the first publication that we together with Dr. Covey and his former student, Ken Hayes, we did the global characterization of all the snails that have in different countries that it has invaded. So we looked at specimens from all over the world where the invasions of apple snails have happened, including in their native range. And we found out that they belong to, that there are two species that are introduced to Southern Asia, and that is P. caniculata and P. insularum. P. insularum name has recently been changed for the past few years, again from our work, because it is now called maculata. The other thing that, so there are two groups. One is the P. caniculata group, and the other one is the Pomacea britsi group. And in each of these groups, we can easily know which are the most problematic are the caniculata group, because they are the main pest of rice agriculture, including other aquatic crops. So later I'm going to show you a little about the different species. So, you know, P. caniculata occurs in around 16 of the 21 countries that we have surveyed. And P. maculata occurs in 6 countries, of which 4 also had P. caniculata. So, you know, you had a mixture of both P. caniculata and P. maculata. And this is what the problem is, because with the wrong identification, we have created a lot of confusion in the past. So any literature that you see before 2008, you should double check it, because you may be referring to P. caniculata, but it is maybe P. maculata. So I think that's quite a big problem, because at that time we did not have much knowledge about using you know, this technique of molecular tools, especially for snails, because we thought the snail traditional tools are good enough to identify different species. But however, this is one of the things that we have resolved now globally, and everybody is able to now correctly identify the species. So this work with Professor Kobe and the Philippines, with other partners now, we are very confident on what kind of species, because each species have a different management strategy that we need to adopt. This is just a simple example of or further explanation of, if you look in Cambodia. I used to work in Cambodia before with the Cambodia Area Australia Rice Project, and there at that time the snail were not a problem yet at that time when I was there. But later in 2002, what we have found out that, you know, Dr. Kavi went there and he identified many of the time, earlier identification was P. caniculata because of the using the old taxonomic tools. However, the only species that is present in Cambodia is maculata. So the correct name is maculata. Similarly, for other countries like Indonesia, our ASEAN member state countries, they all now use our classification and our technique to identify the species. And later in my presentation, I'll show you how we are working with all these countries. Now, there are 2 species, as I said, caniculata and maculata, and the native range is also in South America, but the caniculata has a wider native range compared to maculata. And you know, again, these countries, I'm just showing you when they were introduced in the country for either for deliberate use, or they have invaded from other areas and become a pest. So these are the dates of introduction. So usually during the Philippines was in 1980s. They were the first known introduction, and then, you know, the other countries in the ASEAN region, they followed us, and now they all have a problem of managing space. So at the bottom of my presentation, I am providing the links. So, you know, I may not be able to give a lot of details in my presentation, but you are most welcome to look at these links. And at the same time, at the end of the presentation, I will share my presentation to all the participants, so they can contact me anytime. Now, looking at the distinguishing characters, we have identified the two species. Now, even using the more accurate traditional two anatomical characteristics, as well as on the morphological characteristics between the two species. But this is what is more important because they are problem of aquatic ecosystems. You know, the term golden apple snail should not be used anymore. That's why in our latest book and all publications, whether any publication that comes for me to review, I make sure that the use of golden apple snail should not be used because it is a problem. Because in the olden day, in the earlier times, we were using P. caniculata and P. maculata, and they have similar common names. And so there was a lot of confusion that was created in the scientific literatures that we do not know what. So it was very difficult to even compare data from other countries because we do not know what species are we really dealing with. So now the use of golden apple snail is not allowed in scientific literatures, and the invasive apple snail is the right term to use to distinguish the two species. So there is a big species confusion. This is in summary. There are two species that are introduced to Southeast Asia, not only P. caniculata, but also P. maculata. And one or both of those species of Pomacea have become widely established in many parts of Southeast Asia. And P. caniculata appears to be more widespread in Southeast Asia, while the P. caniculata is less widespread. Now, if you look in other countries like in Spain, and even in Haiti, I think you have more of maculata. So what are the impacts? The impacts, you know, are very huge. In the Philippines, it's around 1.2 billion annually, and this excludes the cost that is in the losses of human health and damage to natural ecosystems. Similarly, similar kind of losses are also being reported in other ASEAN countries and in other invasive areas. And you can see the damage of the snail in transplanted rice. This is one of the earlier works that we did. And globally, you know, they are causing around 55 to 248 billion US dollar annually, the losses from the snails. And you know, the biggest threat of snails currently is when many countries are now going into direct seeded rice to reduce the labor of growing rice and to make the rice production more profitable, not only in the Philippines, but even in almost all the rice growing countries around the world, the focus is on direct seeded rice. And this is where the problem of snail is very serious. So now 100% of our work now focused on looking at how to manage snails in direct seeded rice. And until today, I think none of the countries have developed a good technique to manage the snails in direct seeded rice. So this is the main focus of my work currently. Now, looking at the impacts on the human health, they are important parasites for the rat lungworm parasites and also other kind of parasites. And the farmers in most of these countries, especially in the ASEAN region and even in the third world countries, I have seen farmers have no protective clothing. They don't wear shoes. They don't have a proper, protection. So what happens? These snails, they cause a lot of. Once these snails are dead, the broken shells are as sharp as a broken glass. So you know they provide a lot of entry to the organ to the infections. And also the other impact on the human health is most of the farmers had resorted to, in the early 1980s, most of the farmers have resorted to very toxic chemicals, organotin compounds, which were coming basically from Taiwan and other countries where they were used to control snails. But however, in the Philippines, we have also seen problems of using these organotin compounds, especially to the animals and to the farm animals like carabao and other and even farmers' nails. They were peeling off. So this was one of the visible impacts of using organotin compounds. So our work in the Philippines have put a ban on these products already. They are not available, and similarly, other countries around the region have followed the lead from the Philippines and have banned those products. And even now, Taiwan doesn't use those kind of products. So we've come out with some safer products. The other very recent work has been done on the Asian tiger mosquitoes. They are becoming very serious, especially in Florida, because of the snails. The snails there are mostly, Pomacia maculata, and in these the shells, the empty shells, the mosquito larvae are using as a refuge. So the incidence of the mosquito-borne diseases in Florida and also in other countries is increasing. The environmental impacts are very serious, especially because of the misuse of pesticides. And in the Philippines now, you can see one of our work which we did few years back, which was probably the first work anywhere have ever been done. If you use niclosamide, which is actually the only organic molluscicide, the only synthetic molluscicide that is approved by the World Health Organization. So this molluscicide, niclosamide, is widely used in many countries now because it's very safe. However, what we found out, if you use this in pre-germinated seeds, especially in direct seeded rice, you are going to have more problems of snails because the snails will have a longer time to feed on the rice sprouts because the use of that chemical in the early stage of rice during the right after sowing will cause the reduction in shoot and root length. So as a result, the plant becomes more susceptible to the damage by these snails because these snails only prefer plants that are less than 30 days old. So what are the other impacts? The other impacts are on trade. Recently we have done an extensive study in Malaysia and in Thailand, and we have come out with the Thailand from Thailand, the water cabbage, the ipomia, which is kangkong. It's very common in Thailand. It's one of the export commodity. Now Malaysia has put a ban of getting kangkong from Thailand because they observe contaminated snails, which are very less than 1 millimeter size, which are attached to these kangkong cuttings because it's an export crop for Thailand, and they send it to other neighboring countries. So now there is a ban. Similarly, now the European Union has put a ban on the trade of aquatic aquarium plants because the aquarium trade is one of the reasons, or is one of the pathways of the introduction of these snails. And recently in Africa, we have seen that if the farmers exchange seedlings from one area to another area, that means an area which is infested by the snails, and to a new area, so they transport actually the young snails, juveniles, together with the rice seedlings to the new areas. So this now in Africa, this has been strictly followed based on our observation on how the different pathways help the snails to travel. The environmental impacts are very serious, even in the Philippines now. You hardly find native snails. This is a native snail on the top with its white eggs, and this is actually the snails which most Filipinos consume because it tastes good and its flesh is not rubbery. So this snail is now completely getting extinct. And also in the native fish, the jojo, which is a very common Japanese fish in the Ifuka rice terraces, you can hardly see them in the rice paddies, because this the invasive apple snail feed on the same kind of plants, or that these native species like the algae, the other microalgae, so they feed on the same kind of the food. So they deprive these native fishes and native apple snails for food. So basically, there is a competition for food, not only on the effect of pesticides that these native species of snails have vanished from most of the rice fields in the Philippines. And the similar trend is seen in Indonesia, because we work also looking at Indonesia, in Vietnam, Cambodia. These countries, they all consume this native apple snail, which is called pila. And this is commonly found in some of the wet markets in the Philippines. So a lot of control methods have been developed over the years, and there were basically methods were for transplanted rice. So I'm going to show a little later about why the current methods are not suitable to provide enough protection, and what are the new strategies that we need. So if you look in different countries, over the years, they have used products. If you look at these, the endosulfone, the cartap, the copper sulfate, these are all now, the endosulfone, cartap is all banned, because even though they provide a very good protection to kill snails, but they have adverse environmental conditions, and including human health. So most of the countries now, they have put these pesticides on the red list. Now, the two synthetic molluscicides which are approved by most of the countries now, I'm showing Indonesia, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, almost all the countries. They have some of this data is old, like in Cambodia now, niclosamide is also, metaldehyde is also sold. So these two are comparatively very safe. However, metaldehyde is now currently, going into a lot of pesticide review, especially in Europe, because of the detection of metaldehyde residues in groundwater level. Niclosamide is the only synthetic molluscicide that is recognized or approved by the World Health Organization to use in around the world. Now, a lot of plant molluscicide work has been done. In the Philippines, if you know the former Professor Dr. Belen Jesus from the University of the Philippines, and also from other universities in the Philippines, we have seen a lot of work has been done on plant molluscicides. But mostly these plant molluscicides either to kill the snails or to attract them. However, if you look at all these countries, you can hardly find a commercially available plant molluscicide. And this is the one of the work that I concentrated for the last 8 years with a US company and with the University of Texas. We had a team of scientists from Canada and also from US universities, and we developed. So all work of testing was done in the Philippines, and I was the one who helped them in terms of how the formulation should be prepared. So this is a very, very unique work that we have done, and now we are very happy to announce that this product is already approved in Vietnam, and now the registrations are going in other countries, including the Philippines. So this was the work that it took us almost 7 years, and we had to get all Environmental Protection Agency of the US clearances in terms of residues, in terms of impacts on native bird species, aquatic. So a lot of on non-target organism, including human health. So this is the product. Some of the products are mentioned here. This is, I have not mentioned the products that we have developed with Texas and with other universities. And this is the product that is now widely used and marketed in Vietnam, and hopefully very soon in Cambodia, Myanmar, and other invaded countries. So most of the plant molluscicides, most of the work that has been done in the past, most of these plant molluscicides are equally lethal compared to the synthetic molluscicides that we are using, especially to the non-target aquatic organisms. Like if you look at the work that has been done by the University of the Philippines before, and even with other researchers in other countries, the use of Daris, that is tuba, the use of Daris can easily, kill snails in rice fields. But the quantities that you are using and the kind of preparation that you are using, farmers are discouraged to do it. And secondly, they have a very big impacts on especially on the fish mortality. So, these are not very safe products, even though they are botanicals. So sometimes when you work on botanicals, we have to be very careful. Recently, we are working together with the Pampanga State Agriculture University and with the Central Luzon State University, with a funding from the Philippine Rice Research Institute. And we are looking at nano biomolluscicide. And this, what we have seen is that you will reduce the quantity of molluscicide. So our approach here is not just to kill the snails, but how can we repel them and become more like an antiphedant. So we are looking not on the mortality aspect, but we are looking at other techniques on how we can avoid, how the snails can avoid or become sick and the death is slow. So, there are a lot of quarantine procedures that are implemented by many countries, but none of them are effective because, quarantine in most of the countries is still not as stringent. Like you compare Australia, you compare US, you compare Japan, the quarantine is really strict. So I remember when I was working as a Japanese Society for Promotion of Science, I had to bring samples from the Philippines because I was looking at the cold tolerance of the temperate and tropical populations of invasive apple snails. So, there were a lot of paper requirement before, and even at the airport, they had kept our samples of snails, which are in inactive stage. They have kept and they checked, and after a month, they were released to the Japanese National Agriculture Research Station, where I was the international exchange scientist. Biocontrol, a lot of biocontrols have been reported, but our work has shown that biocontrol, especially with using fishes, is not very effective in terms of when you are really in farmer's field. Most of the biocontrols have been evaluated under greenhouse conditions, and they are effective inside this greenhouse condition. When you look in the real rice environment, in the real rice field, then they are not effective because there are a lot of other confounding parameters that affects the efficacy of many of these biological control agents. One of the techniques which most farmers and most people should focus on, and which farmers, these are actually farmers' observations. So, I tested a lot of these techniques. There are a huge number of techniques that are there at the bottom. Some of them are actually recommended by FAO and also by ERI and implemented through the Department of Agriculture in the Philippines. Also in other countries, they were following because they thought, but these are all for transplanted rice. And many of these, I will show you a little later, that many of these are not effective, only few are effective. So we focus on those that will provide the maximum protection to the rice, especially in transplanted rice. The use of snails, now there is a lot of use of these snails in other countries, including, most of the countries. Now, one of the latest things that I want to show you, which is very new, is, many of the shells of the snails are now used, especially from the invasive apple snail shells. They are used as a catalyst for biodiesel production, and because it has a very high level of calcium oxide. So Indonesia and Malaysia, they are doing a lot of work, especially on using the snails. And this is also, there's a chapter in my latest book where they have shown how the snail shells can be used as a catalyst for biodiesel production. So this is the approach, that was implemented to the Swiss government funding and International Rice Research Institute and FAO. And, this was done in 1991. So it almost around since 1991 until 2002, a lot of these things are being taught in farmer field schools and all. So basically this coincides with the management of snails with the stages of the rice. So what do you do at the seedling stage? What do you do at the vegetative stage? And after the vegetative stage, there is not a problem of snail. They are just present there at the reproductive and maturity stage. So, many of these techniques are like releasing ducks in rice field, hand picking of the snails. These are actually very difficult for farmers to do. They can pasture duck, but what's happening with the pasturing of ducks is that the ducks carries a particular kind of mite. So, many farmers, transplanters, they don't want to go to the rice field to transplant those fields where the ducks have been pastured, because they get a lot of dermatitis and itchiness. So most of the laborers or the farm laborers, they don't want to go to transplant rice. So this is one of the issues that we looked at. And the second is the hand picking of the snail. This is impossible to pick up snails. Even if you have only 1 hectare field, how do you pick the heck? So I think most of these recommendations. And the third is also, collection of hand collection during the canal and all this is very difficult, because the snails, they multiply very rapidly. You are getting almost around 800 eggs per egg mass. And if a single snail lays around 4 times, you have already more than 3,000 eggs. So I think these methods. So most of the management old options, they were very labor intensive. They were not economical. They were not sustainable, and many are harmful to the environment. And particularly in the direct seeded rice now, none of these methods can provide protection to rice from snails. And I did a very big survey in around 2000, because I wanted to find out how many of these practices the farmers are really doing. So 100-kilometer radius of field rice, where in Nueva Ecija, we interviewed more than 400 farmers. Farmer knowledge is very important, interaction with farmers. Because if we are recommending something and the farmers are not using it, then I think we are wasting a lot of money. So I think that this strategic extension campaign has not made a big impact on managing snails, particularly in the direct seeded rice. So what we found out from our survey of around 400 farmers, we found out that none of the farmers are using most of these methods, and they still rely totally on chemical control. But in this approach, the idea was to reduce the use of chemical, and it did not work. So from that time, we started looking at some of the farmers' practices. Are they effective? So we validated some of them. And because they are doing it already, they are doing it, but they are not following some of the ones that are recommended. So we found out that many of the practices we were able to improve and give us a science to it and make it more beneficial for the farmers to use it. So we developed a new management strategy on snails, especially on transplanted rice, because we are still working now on direct seeded rice. So there is no need of using older seedlings, which was the earlier recommendation, because the older seedlings, they produce less number of tillers, less grains, and so the farmers will lose good harvest. So we developed a technique on how to raise a stronger seedlings, not by applying more fertilizer, but looking at how to control the water release in the seedbed and to make them more tolerant to water stress. As a result, the plants do not grow very vigorously and the leaves do not droop down, which makes the snails palatable. So the second, we also identify certain of the Philippine rice varieties, which are already released by the Philippine Seed Board. Some of them, they grow very fast during the seedling stage, so they provide mechanical resistance to snails. Before transplanting, we developed a technique, where we were asking farmer, how can you do a well-leveled field? So they were trying to, we did a lot of work. We looked at what farmers were doing, at the same time, a participatory research with them. And we found out that even though they try a lot to level the field, but it is impossible to have a well-leveled field. It is not like doing a laser leveling in Australia or in the US, where you can get 100% perfection as a level, which is not practical for many of the countries where the snails have invaded, because many of those countries are the farmers are still poor. So we developed a technique. We looked at where we tell them first to level the field, and we now ask the farmer to just open the outlets. So we know where the water pockets are. Those are the water pockets where we want to focus the snails to manage. So what happens is that before they transplant rice, we already know the areas where there are water pocket. We ask them that before they transplant rice, the next morning, they put a newspaper. And this was the idea that the Philippines our group has developed. The old newspaper, the newspaper is a very good attractant, whereas other farmers in other countries like Japan and other Korea, they are using market vegetable waste or rotten fruits or for easy collection. But for the Philippines, the old newspaper is an excellent technique. You put the old newspaper and the next morning you come before transplanting, all the snails are attracted to the newspaper in the waterlogged areas. So right after transplanting, maintain a shallow depth of water, because if the height of the water is half the height of the height of the snail of the cell, where the shell is around 20 to 25 millimeter in the Philippines. So if you have half of it, the snails will not move. So this is a technique where we have made the snails to sleep during the early stage of rice. And now we release more water after a week. And so now instead of snails eating the rice seedlings, they start eating on the newly germinated weeds. So this is another way of growing organic rice, which is now widely used in Korea, this technique of, so our methods are easy to do. Farmers, they are widely using it, not only in the Philippines, but also in other countries now, especially in the ASEAN region. They are very effective. They are economical because it doesn't cost extra to the farmer, and they are sustainable, and they are definitely environmental friendly, and they are healthy. So the main idea in the transplanted rice we have developed is you can grow transplanted rice even without a single application of pesticide. So this is, our work has shown that you can grow organically. You can even grow rice, especially transplanted rice, without using a single application, except in waterlogged areas. In waterlogged areas, in water, like low-lying areas like in Bulacan, in Surigao, those are the areas you still need to use one application in transplanted rice. So what are the new challenges? The new challenges is that if anybody asks me, are we working on snails? I said, yes, we are working on snails, but we are not working on transplanted rice because we are not interested, because we know in transplanted rice, most farmers are now able to manage the snails on the technologies, on the simple techniques that we have developed. Our main focus is on direct seeded rice, because this is the dominant rice production system that is going to be in the whole world. And most of the countries are now providing breeding varieties for direct seeded rice, because direct seeded rice reduces labor and also reduce the cost of production of rice. The second area that, Philippines as well as many countries are going into is hybridized production systems. And also because of the frequent flooding, the snail management in flood prone areas is the key issue. Like with the EU project in Spain, I work on flood prone areas because of the salinity that comes with the flooding in those countries. And we have developed some saline varieties, but we are also looking at how the snails we are able to manage the snails in the saline prone areas because of the sea level rise. So I think this is one of the challenges that we have. The biggest challenge on managing snails is because of their high plasticity. They are able to adjust to different environmental conditions. They are able to adjust even under minus temperatures. They are still alive. They are alive even when the temperature are more than 40 degrees centigrade. And they are able to survive in polluted waters where other living aquatic organisms cannot survive. They survive very well in water polluted areas with heavy metals. So, they have a very high level of, that's why they are considered as a pioneer species. The second concern that we have is how we are going to reduce the misuse and abuse of synthetic pesticide, especially in the direct seeded rice. So, because in transplanted rice, rarely farmers are using molluscicides now. So in this, our focus is more on looking at greener products. That's why we have developed the first botanical pesticide. And we are doing more work on this, especially looking at new molecules and new formulation technologies, as well as new application procedures. The third impact, the third challenge that we have, which is very serious now, especially in China, especially in the US, and also in around the world, including Ecuador, Spain, in the Philippines, nobody is looking at this thing. But, during our earlier work in field rice in 2000, we already saw the rat lungworm parasites that are vectored. And we had a poster which we presented in the international conference in Vietnam, which was funded by the ACIAR. And they were very amazed that, Philippines has looked at the rat lungworm parasite. It was an international rodent conference where we presented the snail vector diseases, especially the rat lungworm parasite. And rats are one of the vectors together with the snails. So this is very rampant in the Philippines. And I think this is what we should work closely with the UP Public Health. And, when we worked before, we worked with Central Luzon State University, but a professor of parasitology who used to also be a PhD student at the University of Philippines Public Health in Manila. So that paper won the best poster award because we had something shown which is already, and now many countries around the world are now focusing on this parasite, because this parasite causes the person really lethargic and may not kill it, but it makes you useless because it affects your central nervous system. We have developed a lot of knowledge-based products with our collaborators around the world. Now we have country reports for all ASEAN countries. You name it where the snails have invaded. And most of these reports, the senior author is the national researchers from their respective countries, including, and I am always on the last because I want them to. The main idea of producing these country reports is because we want to prepare a global proposal where we want to get a big international funding from a big international donor because they, especially with the climate change, with the impacts on farmers' health, because now the UN is looking at one health system. So what it means not only plant health, human health, as well as animal health. So, you know, that's where we are targeting. That's why in preparation to that, we have developed these country reports. We are almost done with all the country reports. And we have also come out with the invasive block, which is a CABI. They have this invasive species blog. And, you know, this is the most widely read blog of CABI in last 2 years back. And because many people are interested on this snail. So PhilRise or the Philippines have taken a lead actually in the snail work around the world. And we are also more on the management. We are looking more on the management rather than on taxonomy. With taxonomy, we always rely on Dr. Robert Covey from University of Hawaii. So in 2006, the PhilRise came out with a book on golden apple snail. You know, that's the time we did not know that there are more than one species. So there are a lot of information on this global. It's a global book, not only about Philippines, but about other countries where the snails have invaded. In 2007, we came out with a new book with Professor Robert Covey as one of the co-editor, and with Dr. Leo Sebastian, who is now currently the special advisor to the Secretary of Agriculture, Dr. William Dar. So the PhilRise has been supporting me a lot. And I did not have much support, absolutely no support from the International Rice Research Institute, because the researchers there thought that snail is not a problem. But now our work, that's what I always say, even if you work for a national system or a national university, if you can make an impact, you can change the thinking of international organizations, including international donors and partners. So a lot of countries are now believe on the work that we initiated in the Philippines. And I think Philippines, with the US partnership and with other countries in the Europe, I think we are making good progress. But this is not just the time to relax, because we still need a lot to do how to manage the sales in direct seeded rice. We have developed a lot of databases. If you look at this, the Center for CABI Species Compendium, this is the best reference material you can get. So, you know, first it was originally this data sheets on invasive apple snail. You see, at that time, they are still using the term golden apple snail. Actually, and now things are changing. So, you know, Dr. Kavi and myself, now we take the lead around the world, and we share a lot of information, because we capitalize on the strength of each of us, and then also with other partners that work with us globally. The recent invasion of snails in African continent for the first time in Kenya. So now Kenya and other African countries like Nigeria, Madagascar, they're all worried because of this is just around 3 months back. So I was hired as a consultant to prepare the working paper on how to manage the snails in East Africa. And, you know, that is where you can see most of the work that has been done by our partners. You know, the authors are mostly from the organization. They just contracted me to do this. And so I was very happy to do this, because in any new country where the snails have invaded, I had an opportunity to contribute the work that we have done with the Philippines and with other ASEAN countries, because the species that is present in Kenya is Pomacea caniculata, which is the common species in the Philippines and many of the ASEAN countries. Including in the ASEAN Clearinghouse, which is in Los Baños, which is a facility. It has a very good database where you can get information on the invasive apple snails in different languages. Because, you know, when you deal with other countries like, you know, Vietnam or Laos, you know, it is good to provide them information in their own local language. So this database automatically transmits all the translates all the information into the local dialects for them to easily understand and use some of the recommendations that we have provided in this database. The Global Invasive Species Database is the global database which is for different species of invasive species. For snails, there are only 2 people who are included in this database: Dr. Kavi, my good colleague and a friend, and of course, I have been working on snails, especially on the management side. So I provide a lot of update on this global species database. One of the good things that I feel and I am proud is that while I was the visiting professor at UP Baguio, and I'm very grateful to the then Vice President, Dr. Concepcion. That was the first time I ever met her, because she attended my seminar when I was finishing my 6 months duration as a visiting professor in UP Baguio. There I introduced a three-unit course on invasive species. Because what I personally feel, like if you look at other countries like US, Europe, and other advanced countries, even at the undergraduate level, they know about invasive species. They know about invasive species. So why? Because the invasive species are the second most important in terms of habitat destruction. So we introduce, and I'm so proud that some of the students are still working on invasive species, and now the UP Baguio has come out with a Master of Science in Conservation and Restoration Ecology, and one of the units there is about one of the subjects about invasive species restoration ecology. How do you restore ecosystems when the invasive species have invaded? And I hope that one time, probably sometime in the future, I may be able to teach at least again just on invasive species in an MS care program. This is the book that we launched in Singapore during the 5th International Rice Congress. There were more than 3,000 people, rice researchers around the world. And in this book, this is the book at the bottom is the revised book. It's a new book, and it has given the latest information about invasive apple snails. So there are actually three sections in the book. One talks about the general biology of the snails and all. And you can see there are 9 chapters in this book coming out from 21 authors and from 8 countries. The idea here is how to bring everybody together, because we only had 9 chapters, but we had 21 authors. So we wanted to make sure that none of the chapters in our book are single authored, because we want to harness the research of all other researchers and bring the researchers together into one platform, so that we do not work in isolation when we have the global proposal funded. Now, second talks about the country-specific reports. And again, you see there are 8 chapters with 29 authors and 7 countries. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to Pakistan. I have a webinar with the Pakistan National University there. And so a lot of, because in Pakistan, it's only a few years that it has invaded. And now is because of the threat that we have for India. So we have to also provide information to our neighbor partner. So here there are 8 chapters from 29 authors from 7 countries. And the third section is how to manage and use it. And so there are 5 chapters, 17 authors, and 6 countries. If you look at the whole total coverage of the book, there are 22 chapters only, but there are 67 authors coming from 17 different countries. So, this is the kind of collaboration we are working with. And this is what I believe working together as a team. When you work on, and this book is easily available, freely downloadable, because one of the conditions that I set Philippine Rice Research Institute, when I was not working with them, I was working in Fiji. I said, I'm willing to publish this book with Phil Rice, but I will not take royalty, but I have one condition, that this book should be freely downloadable to anybody who is interested to download, and this book is not sold. So this book is now a free copy of the book is available on any of the download, but Phil Rice also have printed copies for those who wanted to have it for their library. So you can get this copy for free. So, you know, the invasive species, the invasive apple snails and the climate change are with climate change, the snails are definitely going to be more serious from in the current times. We all know, you know, I explained climate change to many of my students and also to people who are laymen. We all know that the earth is getting warmer. So what happens when we expect ecosystem changes? That means there will be shifts of some plant and animal distribution, like invasive apple snails are increasing their distribution. They're spreading to new areas because of the ecosystem changes and also because of the pathways. And this is going to favor and establish of many invasive species, including the invasive apple snails. And this is because they have high level of plasticity, they are pioneer species. And this is what I'm showing you. See, I'm showing on the right-hand side, the countries that we work with, all the ASEAN member countries where the snails have invaded. And I happen to visit all these countries and we continue our collaboration until today. So in the invasive species management, this is going to be my last slide. I talk about more about partnership and future collaboration. This is not the end for me. We have still a lot of things to do. We have a lot of things to do on our plate, especially to manage snails in direct seeded rice. You know, invasive apple snail is a global problem. You can see it already. I've shown in my presentation. It has invaded so many countries. It is causing, it is becoming more and more problem with climate change. And of course, you need regional, national, and international cooperation. You know, all this, that's why those country reports were made, because we want the regional partners to come in. We want also the national partners. We work with so many organizations in the Philippines, like, for example, same other countries, we are initiating efforts at the national, and of course, international cooperation, like you talk with JICA, you talk with USDA, you talk with USAID, you talk with private sector, we need international. So the other thing that is there in managing the snails, we need to have a unified approach within and among the countries and across sectors. Don't only think about agriculture sector, think about environment sector, think about private sector, think about, health sector and different stakeholders. The stakeholders should not be only from the university professors or from research organization, even with the non-governmental organizations and even with private sector, especially if we want to develop products and we want the safer products. And this is one of the examples I was telling, that with the US universities and with the US private companies, we were able to develop a product which is now widely used which is widely commercially available in Vietnam and soon to be available in many countries, including the Philippines. So I always think of one thing, first of all, we should never underestimate our capacity wherever we are working, whether it's a national organization or a national university. We should think global. We should look how other countries are doing it, and we do things that can benefit our own country and our own farmers. So with that, I would always say that we should think global, but we should act local. And please be anybody who is interested, your students or your colleagues, they can always contact me on my email, and I will also share my presentation. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I'm open for any clarification or questions and suggestions on how we can improve our international cooperation and how we can further intensify our efforts together with other people and other organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Joshi. It was a very interesting talk, and you really provided us with a lot of information. So I'd like to open the floor to our attendees for any questions. But yeah, so if you want to raise your questions directly to Dr. Joshi, just kindly raise your hand. If not, you can just type it in the chat box. Dr. Joshi, there's actually one in the chat box. It's from Rosario Calderon. She's asking if you can share the link where they can download the book through PhilRise, the book that you were showing initially.
Yeah, I can do that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just sending you my PowerPoint presentation.
All right.
I've just shared it, so you know they can easily download from that as well. But anybody who's interested, they can just email me. And it is actually you can search, just put the name, the title of the book. You can easily find the book, and you can also see how many people have already read around the world. So there's no problem. I can even send the link. I can copy the link and send it to you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so it was really a very interesting presentation, and I think it's really important. And you're just talking about one kind of species and just one kind of and just rice, and you can just imagine that invasive species really exist for all other types of crops. Wait, let me call Dr. Gisela Concepcion. I think she has a few questions.
Sure.
And I'd like to congratulate Professor Joshi for this excellent talk that's got the global and local impact. And I think your last slide is appropriate. The term used is glocal. Go glocal. Learn from lessons globally and then apply it to the local situation. Which brings me to my question. There are many of them, but there's not a lot of time, Professor Joshi. First is, how do you think PAASE, with its many experts in various fields of science, can help in this global and national effort? Secondly, I'd like to focus on Vietnam as a model. So we met with Leo Sebastian, who's Undersecretary of Department of Agriculture and also the Chief of Staff of the Secretary of Secretary Dar. And he chided, he was proudly telling us that he solved the rice productivity problem in Vietnam. Imagine, he spent over 6 years there, and it's only when Secretary Dar asked him to come back that he returned. And then we were faced with the problem of rice insufficiency. And so he says, he's chiding and saying, well, at least I helped Vietnam, and now we're able to import the, rice from Vietnam. But I just wanted to ask you what it is that Vietnam is doing so well in terms of rice productivity that would be affected by this snail infestation or invasive species, and how would it be possible to get our farmers, our LGU level officials to contain the problem in the Philippines? What is it that Vietnam does that somehow we're not doing as well in the Philippines? I mean, apart from what UP Baguio has done with that CARE program that was instituted during our time, okay, that restoration ecology program that, yes, you were involved in, and where I first met you. Everyone, let me tell you that Professor Joshi is Filipino. He's more Filipino than many people we know. His wife is Filipina and has lived here for more than 25 years. So thank you for your dedication to the Philippines. Yes. So maybe second, Vietnam.
So I think the most important, I have stayed in Vietnam for 3 years, and I used to work there with the very big private company. So what I have seen in Vietnam, and I work very closely also with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, they call it MAD in Vietnam. So what I've seen in Vietnam, one thing, what I have seen first is why are they so successful? In my opinion, Vietnamese people, they never take defeat. I have seen that if they continue to fail, they continue to try and try and try. And secondly, if you look at the climate adaptation projects, among the Vietnam has been one of the most successful, because they don't talk much, but they do a lot of work in terms of how to improve the farmers' livelihood, and also in terms of agriculture. Yeah, so in Vietnam, I think the most important is the policy, that has the policy implications and the policy implementation, and the policy trickles down from the top till the lowest ward. So if there is an order, it goes, everybody has to follow it right up to the lowest village. They call it ward. That is the smallest unit, smaller than the barangay. It's right at the ward level. So in terms of Vietnam, they have been closely working with me, not only researchers, but even private companies. That was the first country that told us that they are interested to introduce our product, especially that we did with the University of Texas and with the US company, which almost took us around 7 to 8 years to get to a product formulation, which is one of the safest botanical pesticide anywhere in the world. So Vietnam said, we will get it registered immediately, and they assured that they want to use it because they see a lot of that it is not affecting their shrimp industry, it is not affecting their aquatic ecosystem, so they jump into it. It's a similar kind of thing. We are trying to register it in the Philippines, but it takes a long time because there are too many requirements. So what the Vietnam did was very simple. They said, instead of we generating the data, we will look at what data has been generated from the submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency, and then they use that as a basis, and only with very few simple evaluations, they quickly registered the product and they are using it. The same company now is providing, getting the registered in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Laos, and eventually also in Thailand. So so I think the point is there. They are very quick in making actions, and the actions are made even at the lowest level. So we have actually demonstrated this product, which is now widely accepted by the farmers, even though the cost is very high, but they see the benefits of it, and no effect on human health, no effect on the environment. So I think that is one of the things. So in the Philippines, I think I don't have to, I've been here, I've been working, but I think what's important is that we need to be, currently the Department of Agriculture is taking a turnaround already with Secretary Dhar, because he has a lot of international exposure, working for the CGIAR centers for more than 14 years in my country, in India. And he is down to earth. He is always thinking about the farmers. He's thinking about how to improve production system.
I think Professor Joshi, Secretary Dar himself did the same thing in India through Excise.
Yes.
Where the key was to get the science research
adapted
by the local businessmen.
Right, exactly.
Got, the private sector involved.
Exactly.
Government-funded research.
Yeah.
Okay.
You are right. You are right, because what I'm saying is we can do a lot of research, but if we do not translate that research into profits to the farmers and profit to the private sector, it will just stay in the shelf. So that's what I'm saying. Our research focus is, we want to focus on developing a technology or developing a technique that is useful to the farmers and also can be commercially available.
That's right. And I think many of us know this. And I like to recognize Chato or Rosario Calderon. Thank you for joining Chato, who's based in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And she's a UP alumna who's of engineering, who's trying to promote all kinds of products that are being developed in the university.
Wow.
So it's good
Thank you.
for Chato to hear this. Okay,
Thank you.
and we have, yes, Chato, please.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Dr. Joshi, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Agriculture is not my area of expertise, but I was with USAID. You mentioned USAID. And I am an officer of USAID that managed our climate change, energy, and sustainable landscape.
Wow.
So when I was in Vietnam, we did manage to deal with MARD, the ministry that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It's actually the implementation of the policy
Right.
that's the difference. So anyway, aside from that, I'm very interested more on the energy side, because you mentioned about the possible use of the shells for biodiesel. How far along have you or others been in developing biodiesel? And is there something, is it already commercialized or what?
Yes, I think for Indonesia and for Malaysia, they are doing already. I can connect you to them. Please send me please send me an email on my address that I have provided. I'll connect you to them, because I think they are, and also with some of my Australian partners who are into biodiesel production. So they will definitely be able to communicate with you, because that's not my field, but I'm just trying to show the kind of work that they have contributed a chapter in my book on biodiesel, where they use the shells as a catalyst.
Thank you, because at the University of the Philippines College of Engineering, they looked at shells as well, but I don't know how, it's in the Department of Materials and I forget what the department is, but basically I would be very interested in making that commercialized, because we need the energy independence and also clean energy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As Giselle said, I'm in San Francisco. It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you, Dr. Joshi. So Dr. Chu also mentioned in the chat that, yeah, shell to energy is very interesting, or in general, anything that can be converted to energy. So as mentioned by Chato, we are really into looking at different options also for generating renewable energy. Okay, so I guess that's all the time we have now for today. Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi, for a very comprehensive discussion on the snails. And I would just like to share with everyone the website of PAASE for all of our upcoming activities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we hope we can see you again, Dr. Joshi, in our other future events. Maybe we'll invite you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just share my screen. Yeah. So all the other events of PAASE can be found in our website. It's paase.org. And that particular website shows all our initiatives, not just the webinars, but all other advocacies and all other research projects being conducted by our members. And I just want to invite everyone to our 41st annual PAASE meeting and symposium, which will be held on October 8 to 11 in Baltimore. And we are currently accepting submissions of abstracts. The deadline has been extended to August 15th, which is, we have a bit more than a week from now. So for all those who are interested, please don't hesitate to send in an abstract. Okay, so, and please visit our website so you can check all other activities that will be happening in the next coming weeks and months. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day ahead. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.